From Florida, 3 minutes.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Unfortunately, this well-intentioned legislation misses the mark when it comes to taking steps to prevent future financial sector meltdowns. The well-intentioned authors of this bill have failed to fully acknowledge the reasons behind the current meltdown. They point primarily to Wall Street as the cause of the meltdown and direct most of their efforts in this bill at further regulating the private marketplace. Certainly, the actions taken by some Wall Streeters were responsible, at least in large part, for the financial meltdown. Efforts to address some of these excesses are warranted and should be part of the reform. However, there are many factors that contributed to the meltdown, and by assigning a disproportionate share of the blame to any one party, they leave in place many of the practices that contributed to the meltdown. If we base our actions upon the mistaken notion that the financial meltdown was principally caused by the private sector and that the regulators lacked the necessary tools to oversee the private sector, then we are bound to repeat the mistakes of the past. The crafters of this legislation have failed to objectively assign blame. History will bear out that a major culprit of the financial meltdown was the government itself and the government's policies, including many such policies that were advocated by members of the Congress. The government-sponsored enterprises, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, were key players in the mortgage marketplace, and they were largely responsible for proliferating subprime loans. Freddie and Fannie were heavily regulated by the federal government. They carried an implied government guarantee. Yet, what did they do? They purchased over $1.9 trillion in subprime loans between 2002 and 2007. That, according to a report by the Government Oversight and Reform Committee, represented 54% of all such mortgages purchased in those years. In purchasing these subprime loans, they were encouraging lenders to make more of them. Had Fannie and Freddie not been such ready buyers of subprime loans, many of the loans likely would not have been made. That is not to say that some of the private sector would not have made such loans, but had they done it, it certainly would not have been on the grand magnitude, since Fannie and Freddie would not have been standing there ready to buy the loans from the lenders. We must also consider the actions of the Federal Reserve. The Fed and other central banks around the world keep interest rates at very low levels between 2002 and 2006, making credit easy and cheap. Making access to money so easy and so cheap intensified and inflated the boom in the early to mid-2000s, as well as the resulting burst in 2008. Common sense would suggest that we would learn from these mistakes. Unfortunately, H.R. 4173 significantly expands the power of the Federal Reserve, the very entity that was responsible for but failed to identify systemic risk in what have become some of the recipients of taxpayer bailouts. Thank you.
One additional minute.
Okay. Even worse is that H.R. 4173 creates a permanent TARP-like bailout authority. This is likely to promote systemic risk and undermine financial stability. Another blatant failure of the federal regulators is the Securities and Exchange Commission's failure to pursue an investigation of Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme. In 1999, Charles McCopples presented the SEC with an extensive report alleging fraud by Bernie Madoff. In 2001, Barron's ran an article outlining the alleged fraud. While they had the necessary tools to investigate Madoff, the SEC's failure to use these tools at their disposal and launch a full investigation enabled Madoff to perpetuate his $50 billion plus Ponzi scheme. As further evidence, it is wrong to further empower bureaucrats. Note that to date, not one SEC employee has been terminated, disciplined, furloughed, or even had the wrist slapped for their colossal failures with regard to the Madoff scandal. We have also heard concerns from small businesses that this bill will further restrict their access to credit. Not only is this particular development troubling.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you.
Gentleman from Massachusetts.